Welcome to the usual Monday life drawing with me, your host, Brandon Reimchen. Hope everybody had a good weekend, and hopefully everybody can hear me. Let's move a few things around and we'll get started. So this week we're going to look at some mapping of the head, the human head, looking at some units we can use to successfully map in a very general way. Of course, every face is different. Mapping the face so it looks like it's correct, some way, shape, or form. There'll always be a face that you want to be targeting, whether it be somebody with a large brow, a large nose, small nose, and so on. So there'll always be some variance within that we can play with. But we'll take a look at that, but we're going to warm up first with some sketches and some coffee, as per usual. All right. So let's just hop straight into the sketching, shall we? I've got a... let's turn this dream on here. Got a pen loaded up, which is kind of like a really nice, almost like an inky scumble. And I've got my value set to sort of a mid-tone gray, and then I've got it set to multiply, so it feels like as I make continuous strokes over top of one another, I'm darkening it down. I kind of wanted that sort of pencil feel to it. So that's what we're doing. So let's hop over to our practice tools, or lineofaction.com for our sketching of the models. And you can pick clothed or nude models, whatever you want in there. So let's get after it here. I'm just going to check in on the old chat. All right. So we're going to start with 30-second poses and then get into some longer poses as we go. Always just warming up, right? Just getting that arm loose, not worrying about whether or not the images are amazing. Try and get it as close as you can, but that is the point. Let's get after it. Having to hold my Cintiq in place because this thing bounces all the way around if I'm sketching. Not super elegant solution, but it'll work for now. Making the crosshair on the face, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into some of our mapping. some of these poses I'm encountering from the last time I did this, but that's fine. We're kind of just, again, warming up. If you find that you need a more varied group of resources, then definitely go and try and find your own. There's so many options out there that you can buy or find that people are giving away. Reason I like line of action is that it just cycles these things for me instead of me having to stop and do it myself. So yeah. Already feel my arms starting to get a little bit, let's say, warmed up. My arms are a little bit heavy for me, so it's like good to warm that stuff up and maybe stretch after, because I am really trying to draw from the shoulder still, not the wrist. So that can be a lot of weight hanging off. Now we get into some 1 minute poses, which is nice. A little bit of a break in there. What is the advantage of drawing from your shoulder rather than from your wrist? Also, hello, how are you? The wrist has such a, let's move back a little bit so you can see me. The wrist has such a limited range of motion. We can think of it as, I mean, just put your hand up and you can see that you have a limited range of kind of waving like this. You can't crank your wrist all the way around. Front to back is pretty good, right? But it's a permutation of those things, right? So we know that there's limited range in our I don't know the axis names, but inward and outward, thinking of it kind of like as pronation, supination as well, kind of the rotation of the wrist, right? Front and back like this. So if you were to draw a circle with just moving your wrist, right, you get something that is very difficult to control. Whereas if I keep this still, I can rotate my arm a lot easier and create some really nice curves. You can at some point get into including sort of course, the elbow, the wrist, and even the fingers as you learn more control with that. But you can, if I'm drawing circles with my shoulder and keeping everything else still, I have an easier time than trying to do that with fingers, or if I pivot my wrist down with my wrist, right? So You'll find, I think, if you try it out, you get these curves, which are harder to do than straight. I mean, straight lines are also difficult to do, but we can use Photoshop tools in that case to create these really straight lines, or rulers, right? But it's a little bit difficult with manual drawing. Illustrators of the past or even present use French curves. There's like a bendy ruler you can get. It sort of looks like, well, the one I have is blue, and you can bend it into these curves that you need, right? But yeah, I would say that that's the sort of that's the benefit I find. I find if students of mine are kind of sketching these hairy little or nervous lines in, I find that it comes a lot from the fingers or the wrist, right? Where they're just kind of noodling a really tiny space. When you're in a life drawing atelier, you can have a lot of room, have a big sheet of newsprint, and really kind of feel the flow through the rhythms of, say, the human body in this case, right? So yeah, that's what I would say. How am I? I'm doing good. Yeah, good weekend. Weather hasn't been great. Standard for 2020. I finished The Last of Us, which I of course enjoy the game, but it's also a huge time suck, that game, or any game now, right? With all the hours that you'd have to put in to finish it. So I just sat down and went, all right, I'm going to finish this because I got other things to do. But it was an amazing game. So well made. And in terms of concept art, just seeing the character design and the way they're working with the environments and the lighting, the different set pieces, it's just such a beautiful work of art. So I definitely, if you can't afford the time or the game itself, definitely watch playthroughs, because it's gorgeous for sure. But yeah, that's me. Next game I probably will play through will be Cyberpunk 2077 whenever that comes out. Just because, I want to spend my free time doing art and other things other than video games. I love video games, don't get me wrong, but it's huge in terms of time suck when you could be like doing your own artwork and getting better at that stuff. It's like you can spend 6 hours in the evening just playing through Modern Warfare, The Last of Us, or whatever. Tried it out. The circles are way smoother. Thanks for explaining. I have been hearing it, but never bothered learning. Yeah, it's especially if you find yourself like somewhere in this place, I've got a massive sketchbook. It's kind of expensive because it's a better quality paper than newsprint. So if you can go find newsprint from an art store, it's super cheap, and it's sort of like a brownish paper, and it's kind of disposable. Of course, you can recycle it, but just get in there and start drawing really big circles, right? Not big circles. I mean, just gestures, really nice fluid gestures, and it can be something that helps you out. Hello, they're happy to watch the stream. Welcome. Without any spoiler, describe the ending with a face. Ooh, that one's. I was sitting there kind of just like dealing with the gravity of everything that you went through in the gameplay, right? Because there's a few storylines. So I was just kind of sitting there like, wow, not like upset or anything, just kind of like, okay. Yeah, so that would be my face, sort of like, should make a funnier face than that. I just finished Horizon Zero Dawn and had a really good time. That game is really my jam. Yeah, I played that. I don't know why I couldn't get into Horizon. I think the artwork is amazing. The gameplay was really great. I feel like if I had some stretch of time, I want to go back and play more of that, because that's also a really well made game. God of War was another one. I love God of War. I guess I didn't want to commit the time to continue to play that game, but beautiful, right? I should probably just watch a playthrough of that so I can see what happens, because I don't know. It's a lot, like I said before, it's a lot of time to spend with a game. And I do like playing games, something like Rocket League. I know they're very different, but you can play 15-minute match or 5-minute match, whatever, a group of matches, and be done in a short amount of time. And, you know, I had my fun. Certainly not there for the narrative. I don't go to Rocket League for the narrative. But yeah, it's definitely something that, you know, I prefer just for time's sake. Yeah. That's the face everyone has. Yeah, I think the first one was the same. There's always the chapters where always leave you kind of like, wow, that just happened. All right, let's get back to the old finishing up our warm up. So we'll just start a new one here. Yeah, I wish there was like another 12 hours in a day, so I could have a little bit more time for that stuff. And I mean, that's something else you think about, is that if you do spend a ton of your time, you know, doing the escapism thing, films, TV, video games, it does really lessen the amount of time that you have for bettering your skills, right? And that's why I would wish there was like 12 more hours in a day, because then you could actually get to all of those things maybe, and infinite energy. So you didn't get tired. But just different priorities, right? Different people or at different points in their lives. I definitely do love video games, so I mean, I wouldn't have worked in them for so long if I didn't. But yeah, something you got to wrestle with, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think 12 hours. Be like one more meal in there. So I love food. One more meal, some time to rest, some time to have fun doing certain things, whatever floats your boat. So the other thing about, I mean, kind of the limitation of Photoshop a bit is if I'm doing anything like we're doing right now with timed poses, some of the poses will be better with, like, say, the model's laying down, right? You're going to get a landscape format. If they're standing up, you're going to get portrait format. So when you're in the studio, you know, you'll get a piece of newsprint that's, well, it's really big. And you can turn it to portrait or landscape really quickly and keep drawing, right? Whereas in this, I could rotate the canvas, zoom in, right? But it's sort of a bit clunkier in a way because it's Cintiq. I mean, I could actually turn my Cintiq up and down like that, but probably smash my keyboard and do stuff like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too old. I think about kind of the traditional drawing method, just having music on and, you know, drawing the model is the catharsis is definitely something I enjoy. But that's what's nice about kind of drawing in a space without a computer, right? Is that you can kind of just do it really quick. Anyway, let us resume the old poses here. Getting into our 5-minute poses so we can when I do longer poses, I still like to go through fairly quickly and map out the body masses first, kind of drawing from our larger shapes to our smaller shapes before we get into any sort of um, nitpicking kind of detail. Starting to kind of line up some of the geometry on the face. It looks a bit weird right now, but I was just kind of marking where some of the stuff on the face would be, just because I want to make sure that I'm looking for that stuff, right? When you do practice, let's say layout of body parts or anatomy, that kind of thing, you want to be cognizant of that even when you're sketching in life drawing, right? Because you're just reinforcing it where those things should go, right? Otherwise, you're guessing. And what I would want to stay away from when doing any sort of life drawing or observational drawing is just trying to translate shapes only, right? Because that you can do that and get pretty good at that and not really have any sense of anatomy, right? How the muscles work and where they go, or where the skeleton is and why those shapes look the way they do, right? You see, like, something that sounds mean to say, but something that rarely impresses me about, when people post their artwork online where they've drawn a celebrity of some sort, is that it's like, yeah, that's great. It does look like Morgan Freeman, let's say. That's always my example. But like, did you learn anything from it, right? Or did you? How much did you learn? Did you maximize your learning in that case? Or did you just translate something like a human photocopier, right? Which can still be beneficial, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the times you're leaving money on the table there in terms of what you could be actually memorizing, right? All of the things, skeletal structure, pose, anatomy and musculature, sexual dimorphisms, that kind of thing. Specifics about race differences and that kind of thing, right? Like all of the interesting things about humans that you could be kind of incorporating into your drawing. Start another one here. We got another model. Hey, marsupial. How's it going today? Good, excellent. I'm doing well. I am doing well. Kind of shortened her leg a little too much in there. That's fine. I can kind of sketch that back in. Another reason why I kind of take it a little bit quick in the beginning and don't get too absorbed in the details is that way you can fix any sort of elements that don't go super well straight out of the gate. The website is called Line of Action. You can set up poses for yourself to play with. It's pretty handy. And I'm drawing from nude models right now, which I can't show on Twitch. So you can also select clothed models as well. But it's very good. It's the best kind of in the Twitch with the Twitch setup. It's sort of going to be the best way to go about things, fortunately, since censoring things, but it makes sense as to why. But definitely try and kind of get your own sketches going, own life drawing going, nude or clothed models, whatever. Hair is definitely part of anatomy, obviously, and there's some really beautiful sort of gesture and curve through hair, right? So that's also something you should definitely make some time to draw and understand, and the way hair grows out of the head and the way it flows, right? Especially long hair, of course. Short hair like mine is not that exciting, but still good to practice. Am I going to color and render this? No, not today. We are just practicing. That's going to be the case each time I host one of these streams, is us just going in and warming up with poses, right? You can sketch along with. Make the whole idea here as well would be that you're making time to practice, right? Which is something not a lot of people, especially when they're starting out, do, right? So you can hang out and follow along with me. Probably finish with this one though, and then we'll kind of start getting into the structure of the face, the human face. Yeah, hair is definitely often overlooked. Nice thing about Photoshop, to be honest, is that if you do feel like some of your proportions are a little bit off, you can scale them. So for me, her legs are just not long enough. I would want them to be something more like that from this perspective view. If I wanted to start cleaning that up, though, I could definitely lower the opacity and get in there with another layer. And maybe a darker brush. And then just start to select my lines a little bit more. Stroke economy, if you've been a student of mine, is something that I mentioned. It's trying to keep the amount of strokes to a minimum so that you get used to designing with your stroke rather than kind of just sketching these crazy hairy lines until you kind of create a summation of the shape. Can be quite helpful in making your artwork feel a little bit more considered. Do I have class today? Today, I don't. I have feedback today and other work I've got to do. It's busy being the head of department for the school. For not the school, the program. There are other heads of department who are similarly busy people. So something else, like I'm looking at this and specifically focusing on this person kind of bending towards us. So the one side of her is stretching this way, the other side is kind of compressing, which we get that kind of, well, and she's leaned back. So it's almost, you can think of it as like a bag or a sack of flour where you're going to get compressions on one side, right? And it's stretching on the other. So get the compressions here, the stretching there, right? So that's what we're seeing in her body. So that's sort of what I'm talking about when I say, you know, instead of just me copying something that I see, I'm thinking about the mass and why it looks that way. And I can kind of take that, process it, put it in the old, the memory banks and come back and use that maybe in a future piece of mine where I don't have to go and necessarily see a reference for everything. I can start to kind of make those distinctions on my own, which speeds up your artwork, your art creation process. There, so we got another 11 seconds left, but kind of leave her like this. Okay. So we've got a few drawings in there, and that's what we're angling for, our faster drawings, kind of getting some of our sense of space. We'll just pause that. Just turn that off for now. So, however many you can get done, maybe, sometimes you might want to angle for like just a half an hour, an hour even, of quick poses, or, 10 minutes of quick poses and then some really long poses to kind of get in from the large to the medium to the small to the micro detail. So that we can focus on practicing that stuff, right, and storing that information. So there we go. We've got, we went a little bit over 30 minutes just because I was chatting, but, that's a healthy way of kind of starting your morning. Personally, I try and sketch something in the morning for fun every morning. For myself, I don't really show that work. It's just I'll erase it and delete it just so that I get the practice, right? So for me, it's a good way of not making things precious. Like, I've got to keep all my drawings, that I feel more confident in my drawings. Like, if I wanted to draw that again, I could, right? It's more about the habit of getting into that. So sort of what we're doing today. Doing any work for games at the moment. If I had tons of time, I might freelance more, but I just don't have as much time. I have personal projects I'm working on that I can't talk about, but yeah, so I am doing the personal work for sure. The older you get and the longer you've been in the industry, the more you want to do your own thing. And you'll probably feel that as you guys progress into the industry. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. I'm just gonna move that over here. Okay, so we're going to talk about some head unit stuff today, and you can see sort of this grid that I've laid out here. And we've got, we're going to kind of be flowing through the Andrew Loomis school of thought with some of the placement of certain simple shapes, the grids that we can use to map out where the eyes are, where the nose is, the lips, the jaw, that kind of thing. And so you can see the grid that I've laid out here. And let's click this. It's a fairly big file, so it might get weighed down. Hopefully not. I just want to make sure that I lock those other layers so I don't draw on them. So you'll often hear artists that are showing how to draw the human head, to start with a circle or a sphere. Circle's easier because we can kind of look at it with just a basic flat 2D perspective here. When we're sketching day to day or creating characters, that kind of thing, it is really easy to start with a circle to kind of give you the sense of where the human head is, right? And then we can start to break those things down into their constituent parts to get some of those proportions in the general range of what they should be. One of the great things is, like, you can look at anybody on the street just walking by, and they'll have different sort of spacing and organization of the similar aspects, like eyebrows and eyes and nose and that kind of thing. So everybody's different, but this is sort of just a general look at how you can summarize those things and get them mostly correct when you're working with that stuff. So looks complicated mathematical. It is and it isn't. It's just a kind of quick way of kind of looking at this stuff. So if we started with a circle, and this will be our front view, this is our side view, you can start to think about creating this grid over top. One of the fastest ways to move from the circle to starting to figure out where things should go on the circle is about half of the circle, as we see here, half the way down, you can draw a line through that circle, right? And if you split that down the middle this way, we get sort of this crosshair, you can imagine. So that sort of can be the axis for the eye line, the person looking out in that direction. So you'll see some people drawn, even when I was drawing my my life drawing, I was establishing where that person was looking by using a very similar thing, right? Although the sphere, or I've turned this circle into a sphere by kind of starting to consider some of the contours around that, I'm kind of thinking about where that crosshair that we're seeing right here, this guy, where that points out toward, right? So this is a little bit more 3D now than that circle. But that's just a good way of kind of starting off where your head will be. Now, if you know where some of the other general sort of shapes sit in the face, then you can go from there. Okay, so let's take a look at that. In our front view, that half the way down through the circle tends to be where the brow line is, right? There is more to the face down below, but that tends to be where the brow line is. And so you want to start with that kind of thing. And so we know where that is. You can kind of start to mark that, right? That's where the brow is going to be. So that means, you know, the lower portion of the face, not the forehead, the hairline, and the top of the skull. That's the lower portion of the face. So the whole face has to kind of fit in this range down in here. Okay. And we can kind of take a look at, from there, some other measurements. We see at the top that there's three kind of grid units, and then on the side it's longer, of course, so it's 3.5 grid units, and that'll represent sort of the length of the bottom of the chin, right? That from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin. So we have those things going on in that that side profile, or this side of the box. We can see that once we kind of figure out there's 3.5 units, we can start to map from there where some of the other elements are. Of course, the brow line will be 2/3 up from the chin. So 1/3 up from the chin will be our nose. That's where our nose is going to go. And then, of course, the chin will be at the base of that. Higher up, that 1/3 will be where our hairline is. And then, of course, that half of a unit is going to be where the top of the skull is. You're going to get hair above that. So depending on how big someone's hair is, you'll have that sitting up on top. So that'll be varied for whomever you're drawing, right? But we're kind of just looking at the base of the skull. So if we know that, then how do we figure out where the eyes are, right? So the eyes are actually sitting at half of that 3.5 box length, right? So once I know where that circle is, I can start to extrapolate from there where some of these other shapes are. It sounds a little bit complicated, but we know that those units, if we just think about those simple units, we can kind of extrapolate from there. So half of the box would be the eyes, so we can start to kind of think about the eyes in there. Right, you can almost start to see the face coming in through there. The nose, the first third in the 3.5 units, is going to be able to, you're going to break the nose to the chin down into thirds themselves, right? That's these guys in here that you can see. So the first third up from the chin, this line, second third, this line here. And it's at that point, that second third is where you're going to tend to find the mouth, right? So we can start to see, maybe I start to kind of embellish some of these shapes a little bit. We can start to see a face kind of coming through there. So interesting. If we know the hairline's a third unit from the top, we can start to maybe draw something very basic from there. And so there we go. We're starting to create a sense of that shape. Now, you can kind of, depending on how you're drawing the character, you can use the base of the circle. We see this here, right? As maybe the base of the lower lip. That can be a nice way of delineating that. That lower third that we were using to find out where the lip was can be where the bottom of the lip connects to the chin, or there's a crease there just below the lip. right? So you can kind of think about that as being another way to look at that volume of the mouth. So if we were to make sure that we're in the center of this, whoops, use the shift key this time, I can start to kind of connect the dots in between those things. And this is our brow line, so we can have our brows kind of sat somewhere on there, our eyes in here, our nose in there, right? And we start to get a sense of that face. Now, some of the other measurements, we have this angle coming in from the top units or the corners of the box up in here. And so usually, I mean, there'll be some permutation of that angle that will feel good. I wouldn't make it a 45 degree or anything like that, but we want to kind of bring that shape in and taper that a little bit. That'll kind of create the shape of the face, the shape of the skull. Some people will have really kind of narrow skulls. Some people will have very square heads, right? Or, you know, it'll seem like it just chops straight down from the head. If we think about it that way, the ears will sit somewhere between the brow and the nose. So in this cavity in here, so we're using the edge of that circle to kind of delineate where those ears might go. Somewhere in that range, right? As we draw down from that bottom part of the ear, we can connect the dots usually around, if you're looking at a jaw, you can see the break in the jaw usually sits somewhere in the range of the lips. And we know where that line is in here. So we can start to kind of triangulate that jaw from the lip line. And you can see that we're starting to get a human head coming out of this, right? We follow that line up the side of the head. What you typically want to do with the sphere at some point is shave a little bit of the sides off, because obviously we're not walking around looking like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bic lighter logo. It's sort of like this round thing, or Bic pens, that kind of thing. It's just this round ball on a character head. So almost like a stick man, right? Our heads don't look like that, or most people's heads don't look like that. What you'll tend to get is that sphere, but you'll get the side kind of shaved off, right? So that you get something that's a little less round on the outside edges. And so we can follow that up to the top of the head here, and we can start to kind of follow that curvature up, and we'll get some semblance of the human skull underneath. Now the hair will sit up on top of that, or tend to sit up on top of that. So we do want to be thinking about that skull shape as being the interior aspect of the skull, not the hair, right? Because what can happen is if you compress that hair down into the skull shape, then they feel like they're almost like they have microcephaly, where, you know, get I think mosquitoes were carrying Zika virus, and you'd get a smaller skull, I guess, out of people that were born with that syndrome. So you don't, I mean, it depends on the character you're drawing, because you could definitely draw a character. Turn the caps lock off there. I could draw a character that kind of has a really, really shallow cranium, right? And you know, hair up on top of that. It will seem like they don't have enough, or they don't have the average room for the human brain to sit in, right? So it might feel very kind of compressed. And you'll see sometimes this will be a way of in entertainment art of kind of, you know, creating a thug or something like that, where it seems like they're kind of more lower face than upper body. And then on the flip side, if somebody has a massive brain, like I think Brainiac, and I think it's DC comic world, it might be Marvel, right? If the face is kind of down here and you get this massive dome up on top, that tends to be used for somebody that's super smart, right? So it's a bit of an exaggeration and cartoon of what things actually are, but you can see sort of some of the problem with that, right? When we don't give that brain box enough room if you want to create an average looking character. So there we go. We've got a kind of summation of those shapes in there. Now, I mean, we can look at this and go, okay, great. Well, how do I know where some of the edges of the eyes are in the face? Like, how far apart should those eyes be? Well, you can decide on that. Some people have eyes that seemingly are way too close together, right? Almost like the eyeballs are touching. But I mean, the human body is different, and we tend to judge it based on averages, right? So there's nothing wrong with your eyes being close together or far apart. It's just usually people are judging based on averages. So if we're going with an average, what you want to kind of think about from the edge of the head in here, wherever that sits, whatever angle you have tapering down into the lower jaw. You'll tend to get different measurements from different artists. But one thing is for sure, you can set up almost this 3-eye width from the center apart, right? In the middle of the head. That's sort of the base level way of looking at this. Is I can have really tiny eyes that are close together, right? But as long as they feel like they're 1 eye width apart from one another, they'll be pretty good to go. And it might be that they have a super wide head, right? And that's fine. But whatever that is, I like to keep those things, at least those units apart. You can have somebody with really big eyes, right? And they might kind of fill more of the head, more of the skull in that case. So sometimes there's units of like from the edge of the head to the corner of the first eye to the inside. You know, you can make those uniform, but I feel like as long as you get those middle, like the distance between the eyes, right, you'll have more success. If you feel like they're too small in the face, then you can lengthen them, but you would keep the distance between them uniform, right? And then that will create that average look. You want to think, though, this is something that when you see some of these graphs of what a character looks like, you want to think that there's an eyeball in a socket in the skull, right? And then there's muscle and tissue on top of that, which creates the eyelid. So there is a kind of range of the kind of ocular cavity in there that will allow for the skull to move around in there. And if you get somebody that's emaciated, that's when you start to see those things come through, right? Is you really get the kind of cheekbones popping out. Not even emaciated, right? Somebody that is lean will have those things kind of popping out of there. So it's something else to be thinking about. Maybe I would go and draw some skulls now and then to know what those big shapes are, so that I'm not kind of winging it all the time with just these units that we're using here. So there's a lot to kind of think about that way, but we are starting to think about the skull anyway, right? By having that kind of rounded shape at the top of the head to create this specific look. So from the side view, what does that mean? So we can just draw straight across from that. So we know that this is the brow line, right? We haven't labeled everything here, so we're going to rely on a little bit of our knowledge. Of course, we can look across, but that's where my brow line is going to be. So the face has to sit below that, right? The crosshair is still good here because that indicates we know this is the brow and here, brow. That indicates where the top of the ear will be. We talked about that here, right? So we might get the ear starting there, and then that will move down to the nose line, which we know is somewhere in there, right? So the bottom of the ear will kind of be positioned somewhere in that space. Okay, so the whole front of the face will be beyond that center line in the ear. At the base of where that ear tends to connect to that line is where you can start to draw that jaw moving in toward to connect up into underneath your ear. We know the break in the jaw we've set up as a very basic turning point in the jaw is starting to be somewhere around this zone. So that's where I might start that break in the jaw or that turning angle, right? And then I can have that come outward into the front of the face. So we get this kind of shape now hanging down from that part of the this circle. So let's just go to the next one here. So that's sort of the way you want to kind of think about that. The face hangs off of the front of that sphere, right? And so that's a good start, right? We can start to think about how far our eyes are hanging out. They're halfway down that box, right? We know that. So our eye is going to be placed around here somewhere. There's a reason why I put this 0.5 in here. So halfway in general, I would say that halfway through that first unit, I would say is where you're going to see the back of that eye appear, right? So we can kind of triangulate where that eye might be. Now, why would that be the case? Well, the eye isn't sitting up against the edge of a sphere, right? If that were the case, we'd have these kind of hilarious looking kind of flat eyeballs on the edge of our face. But it is moved. It's kind of the front of the face isn't this super round thing, right? It is, the eyes are in a socket sticking out from that socket. So that socket actually exists in here, right? And the eyeball sits within that. And then we know that that brow sits up over top. And then we can go and find the nose delineation, and we can kind of draw from there if we're just making something very simple. I'm going to get rid of some of those lines because it looks like he's super old. Let's kind of get that going on in there. So the nose can be anything. I mean, you can have somebody with a really big nose that's hooked, that kind of thing. It just depends on the kind of qualities of the face that you want. And then it will drop down to, in a very general sense, where the jaw is, right? From there, what might happen is you might think, oh, well, I'll put the lips here, right? When you do that, well, let's actually line it up with the mouth line. When you do that, what can happen is it might feel like the jaw is protruding a little bit, or that the mouth is protruding, or that there's an underbite, which is great if you're doing a character that looks like that, right? But what tends to happen is there will be sort of this angle that moves backwards from the nose that points kind of down in towards the jaw a little bit more. So let's back that up and see what kind of look we can get from that. We could have that first upper lip there, but I might move that other lower lip down further, right, somewhere in there, and then have the jaw move out from that. Now, if this jaw feels like it's jutting forward too much, then I can always pull that back, right? So this line that drops straight down in here is a general sort of indicator of where the mouth mass will be, right, in here. So let's actually back that up again. This character, for instance, is maybe a little bit too jaw forward, so I can just erase in there and kind of take that back by a little bit. And we can kind of look at the lips there. The nose can be whatever you want. You know, if you wanted it to be kind of like this broken aquiline nose, you can do that. Now with the male brow, you're going to tend to see that brow stick out a little bit more than on females. It'll be a little bit softer of a rolling shape. Somebody that's like a Cro-Magnon caveman looking guy might have a really thick brow in there. Let's turn that down a little bit. Right, something like really heavy in there. And then if you are doing this kind of thing and you notice, wow, my female characters really look like cave women, that might be it, right? Your brow is becoming too kind of noticeable, angular, massive, sticking out of the face there. As we get up into the glabella, I don't tend to like to follow this curve. I mean, it can be a good way of kind of thinking about the human head. I tend to feel like that's a little bit, doesn't allow for a lot of the glabella, which is sort of this mass at the front of your head there. I tend to kind of give that a bit more squareness, and then I roll back into the back of the head. Okay. And as we get into the back of that head, you can follow the curve. I tend to square that off a little bit more. And then by the time I get to this break in the head, I like to swing back in, because the human skull is not something that is completely circular. Just like we kind of started to change that a little bit in the front view, we're changing it a little bit in the back view there. That's where your spine is going to connect and your neck is going to come out of that, right? And your neck is going to kind of flow out from there. Some people kind of angle this imaginary line out of the jaw and from the eyes in there to indicate where that neck direction will travel. Because what we don't want is we don't want a human face or a skull that sticks out like this, right? That looks like a mannequin head, and even mannequin heads will be a little bit more accurate than that as we're creating that kind of thing. So you can kind of use that to start kind of building the head in there. Of course, you're going to have muscle and tissue that connects and fills in that gap in between there. But that's sort of the way I would treat the human skull in that case. The nice thing about the space in between the eye and the ear is that you can usually fit a human hand in between that, right? As I usually think about cupping my face, right, and cupping that hand over top, so you can get this sort of human hand with a thumb, something like that in between. What tends to happen when I see in junior work a lot is you'll get the eyeball and then you'll get the ear right next to it, because they don't know, they haven't practiced it, they haven't paid attention to that space that's in between the ear and that side of the eye. So that can be a nice way of detecting where that part of the or what that distance will be between your ear and your eyeball, right? So we start to get something that looks like this, right? And a very, very basic way of representing the head. And that over time has come from just kind of looking at the breakdown of some of those units, right? Finding the half of the circle, finding and creating a box from there, and then finding the half of that box, the thirds to find out where your hairline is, where your nose is, and then breaking from the nose to the chin up into thirds to find your lip, right? And then you can use some of these landmarks to generally figure out where those other things are. So, yeah. Yeah. So from there, right, you can start to build a sense of the face. And we can make different changes to the face. Like if I were to make something more feminine, right? Let's just erase some of this stuff in here. So we can see what those differences, those dimorphisms might look like. You'll of course get all sorts of different female faces as you will male faces, right? But the few things would be a bit different. You might get kind of poutier lips or fuller lips than males. Everybody's different, but again, in like commercial art, you'll see it poutier, fuller lips on females and thinner lips on males. But of course, it's up to you to kind of break the rules. But I might get a chin like this, and I might get a jaw that is a little less square and rolls up faster to the ear. That nose might not be as massive, excuse me, on the face. And depending on the nose, you might get it curving up a little bit more into the brow. Sort of what's called a retrousse nose in there. The eyebrow itself will tend to be a little bit higher, but the brow ridge will be a bit softer, right? So we could get something like that. Still have that eyeball in there. That could be, excuse me, it could be something that's a little bit bigger in the head. You'll see in a lot of like even Pixar films, the female characters will have quite large eyes relative to those other things. I'm kind of tracking this imaginary line down through the break or the chisel part of the nose, to the top lip, to the bottom lip, into the chin there, right? So it's sort of like an angle sweep that I'm using to figure that out. And if that's the brow line, I might have that eyebrow travel up and over. Male eyebrows tend to be a little bit flatter, right? And have a lot more eyebrow hair at the edge. Again, everybody's different. We're never talking, in these cases, we're rarely talking about, uh, anything other than averaged ideal forms, right? Because it tends to be what people use a lot in entertainment art, right? Can you break those rules? Absolutely. Are there models with big furry eyebrows? Absolutely. So you can make those distinctions on your own and play with that. But we're dealing with that here. We can kind of get that kind of arching up there that way. Maybe a little bit of an eyelid in there. And so one of the other things you think about in this side view is that we're actually leaving space for the bridge of the nose in here, right? Before that sweeps in the cheek down into the lower part of the face. Because we know that that actually exists. That's where how my glasses are staying on my face, is that there's a ridge line, which is the kind of nasal kind of ridge to my the bridge of my nose, right? So I'm leaving some space there. If you're frustrated, you can pinch that space, right? So there's actually a depth to it. So make sure that there is a depth to it. And if you start to see that you're starting to track your eyeballs to the outside of your face and then the nose comes off of that, well, it's going to look pretty hilarious, right? Because you're not leaving any depth for the nose. You're not pushing those eyes far enough back. Is the large eyes to make it cute to the viewer? It just, I think, tends to be that the eyes are normal size. But the skull shape tends to be a little bit smaller. I don't know physically, I could probably Google this, but I don't know if female eyes are larger in their head, but the skulls are smaller, right? So it might be that the eyes stay similar size to men, or that the proportion is slightly larger in the face. I know plenty of people that have kind of large skulls, smaller eyes, right? It's like better females. So we're talking kind of about like this idealism, right? So anyway, so we get that kind of going on. We get that soft roll to the brow. We could see what she would look like with a kind of massive brow in there. So think about kind of a character that this might work on. It could be that you have this bruiser character, this female character that's kind of got a lot of kind of muscle and maybe more testosterone. You could start to kind of make that jaw more square, right? That brow larger. She could have kind of like a broken nose and more of like a hook on her nose, and still other aspects of her might seem more feminine, right? So as a character designer, you want to start playing with this stuff more often, because it can, if you're doing a range of characters, you don't want every single one of your characters to look like cookie cutter, pretty idealized female character, right? And there are plenty of games out there that do that. It's sort of, you can't even tell them apart. They've got different hair colors and different costume designs, but their faces are pretty much the same, right? Which is, to each their own, whatever the studio or client prefers. But it can be pretty forgettable and pretty basic, right? So, I mean, The Last of Us is a great example of female character design as well as male. They're not idealized forms, a lot of them. Ellie tends to be kind of like the more traditionally ideal face, fairly big eyes in her skull. Same with Joel, sort of like pretty guy, right? Even as he ages. And then you get some other characters like Isaac has like his some of his features are kind of really tight in the skull, and his bridge of his nose is really pressed into his face, right? Whereas other characters might kind of have like a nose that kind of moves out further. Abby had a very kind of distinct bridge, almost looks like a break in her nose, like cartilage damage. And she was, of course, built, right? So yeah, very interesting differences that you can get through physical damage, or it might be an aspect of race as well, right? Because the formations of the face will be different depending on the race as well. So you want to be aware of that stuff and not be kind of just like drawing symbols from memory, every time you create a character, because especially when you're doing portfolio work, it can be pretty forgettable. Yeah, because you're getting spammed every day with this kind of similar representation of male and female ideals. So yeah, I mean, that's something that could make this character look a certain way. Now, when we get into getting into, say, children's faces, the eyes do seem to be really big in the head. The jaw doesn't seem to be as developed or pushed out, so it's very small, the lower portion of the head. So those proportions would be different. And so you'd want to watch out for that, because one of the things that's pretty funny about old school illustration and art is that a lot of models were adults, and so they would draw these baby bodies with like regular human heads, and they're called homunculus or homunculi, and they look hilarious, right? Similarly, there's a problem, and you can see this in the Sistine Chapel, where a lot of the models were male that Michelangelo was painting, and so all the females look like these completely ripped bodybuilder dudes with breasts, right? And so that starts to become a problem because they're not believable at that point. But it's still a very beautiful place to go visit if you ever have the opportunity to. Part 1 or part 2? I assume you're talking about The Last of Us. I was playing the second one that just came out. Yeah. Body height is different as well in some countries, right? Yeah. Well, even over time, Romans, for instance, were shorter than humans are today. And you can see this like walking around. You find some really old buildings in and even in France, you find some really old buildings, and you can see that the doors are actually short, right? Like I'd have to scoot underneath, and that's sometimes just because the building is small, but it's known that people tended to be shorter. As far as I remember, I could be wrong there, but yeah, I think it was over time a bit shorter. And then you do get people that are taller people. I think a lot of you get fairly tall people in the northern part of Europe, for instance, shorter people in, say, Malaysia and that kind of thing. So I think that probably has to do with evolution somehow, of like not needing to be tall for certain ways that the culture worked, right? So, but that's pure conjecture for me. I always like to try and think about why there would be differences and what the benefit of that difference was for those people. So yeah, definitely a thing. Yeah. Do I game? I was just going over, I think you probably came in a little bit later. I do, but sparingly. And just because it takes so much time these days. I was talking about games that are really short, like any shooters, or you can jump in a match and finish a match, or like something like Rocket League. But The Last of Us was a huge time suck. Part of me, I really enjoyed it, and I love learning from the kind of high level of artwork applied to that game. But it's also like so much time to committing to a video game, for me anyway. And am I getting a PS5? Well, here's the thing, right? Is I might, but again, I don't want to dedicate a lot of time to video games anymore, because as you get older, and if you want to take on your own projects, and you have a full-time job, right? You've still got to eat. You got to hang out with your significant others and your family, right? There's not a lot of time in the day. So if I'm spending that extra time on video games, it's sort of like I can do that. And, if that makes you happy, then great. But I also want to achieve these other things, right? And so it starts to be, I've just found over the years that I've just had less time, made less time, wanted to spend less time playing them, right? That's why it's kind of, Twitch is nice, because you can go and watch people play these games and kind of be like, okay, good. I know what happened. I don't have to kind of grind a fight scene because I keep dying, for an hour and then figure it out. Some people absolutely love that stuff, right? So to each their own. But yeah, I'll probably still get one. I like to kind of stay current with those things, and I buy a lot of games to support studios that I like, and products that I like, and then I never finish them. I never finish the games. Like in the last 10 years, I think I've probably only finished a handful of games ever. Red Dead Redemption 2, The Last of Us 1, The Last of Us 2, and then everything else I kind of start playing and I never finish just because I got to do other things. Yeah. Find this too. I've tried to complete the same trophy list for like 6 months now. Yeah. The trophy thing is, for me, is like a complete time suck because you're just trying to check boxes, right? And then, I mean, if I were to be critical of games, like what does it actually give you by the end? And it's something I talk about in the intro course is the 10,000 hour rule. If spending 10,000 hours to get to a world-class level of whatever it is you want to do. And that's 2.8 hours a day for 10 years-ish, right? And so if you get off of work at what time you go home, that takes a certain amount of time. You have dinner, that takes a certain amount of time. You chat with the significant others and family, that takes a certain amount of time. It all takes time, right? And then I'm going to dedicate 3 hours to try and get a trophy on a game that nobody cares about, right? Like, I mean, do you think anybody really cares about your trophies? So, I mean, personally, I don't, but some people, find that like super rewarding, which is, like I said before, to each their own on that. Yeah. You still don't forgive me for liking Mario, though. Yeah, I mean, I like Mario. I never really got into, what was the recent one? Mario, whatever the Switch Mario is. I just kind of not into it that much. It was just kind of like, Again, I think I'm just kind of growing out of some gaming a little bit. I definitely tend towards things that are quicker now. But I still love Mario. Yeah. What's wrong with Mario? Nintendo makes amazing games in terms of quality. Like the gameplay is always super well considered and tested well, right? They really treat their games, in my opinion, like toys, and they just make sure that they're fun more than they just try and cover things up with amazing sort of graphic quality, whatever, cutscenes or that kind of thing. You see the new Ratchet and Clank trailer? I think I did. I probably didn't. I think I heard people talking about it. I can't say that I remember it, so probably not. But I saw the new Crash Bandicoot. And that looks really good. Toys for Bob, I think, is doing it. I never liked the original. I didn't like that you're running into the camera and you had to like jump in the last second to see things. And so the game mechanic wasn't fond of it, but it was amazing. I remember when it came out on PlayStation. Definitely one of the things that sold me was like it looked amazing graphic wise compared to what I was used to. So it's cool to see them kind of return to the roots of that, and very colorful. Like the saturation levels are sickly sweet, right? But it looks pretty cool. What are my favorite drawing tools? I wish it was a bit more kind of flashy than just saying my Cintiq, but I would say that my Cintiq has probably been one of the best things for me to be able to produce a wide range of art, because I like seeing where I draw. Some people I've worked with are just not into this sort of. There is sometimes, if there's a feeling of like there's a gap between the nib and the actual paper or canvas, you can you can generally calibrate that, right? But some people just prefer drawing on a flat surface and looking up at the screen. So for me, I would say the Cintiq. But otherwise, when like if you sit down and you're willing to get into some messy traditional media, India ink, and go grab a twig from outside, right? Snap that twig. You can make a sharp end. You can use a knife and cut it, and then just have an inkwell with this twig, and you dip it in, and it's sort of like you start drawing on it, and the ink starts to bleed off fairly quickly, so you get some blotted lines, and you can kind of continue to pull out of those little puddles of ink and kind of draw these lines. And so much fun. So messy though. India ink will ruin everything. Right, but it's an amazing drawing tool. Just to kind of the tactility of it, and the kind of chaos of it is really beautiful. Willow stick's cool, sort of like charred stick. It's just kind of like drawing with charcoal that you pull out of a fireplace. It is sometimes something that will make really beautiful flowing lines and some varied stroke pressure. But sometimes you'll get it, and just even giving me chills right now, it'll get it like where it sounds like nails on a chalkboard when it skips across the page. It's like, oof, yeah, it's giving me chills. But that's a really nice tool to use physically, right? And it's very nice to blend something like willow stick on paper. It's just very beautiful. That can get, it'll track on your palm or on the heel of your hand, and you'll start to kind of drag that around the canvas. So that's the thing with traditional art, is you have to be way more careful with the actual act of drawing, because you can screw things up by dragging the media through. But then artists will get into like using rubber eraser and I can't remember the name of like this gum eraser that you can mold, and you can always kind of clean some of that stuff up with willow stick, not with India ink. You're pretty much gonna have to paint white on top of India ink to get rid of it once it dries, to kind of tune the drawing. Yeah. I mean, it's funny to say, right? It's like we would go out. I remember this in art school. We'd go out and just grab a stick from outside and come back in and use those tools. I would even draw on, when I was a kid, I'd draw on the back of a dusty window, right? Using kind of my finger and my fingernail to get small detailed lines. It's fun to do that because it's a bit liberating from having only one method of producing art. So yeah, I mean, try a bunch of different things. Putty, yes, thank you. Bamboo stick sounds great. Yeah, it sounds like something you could actually store some ink in. A traditional quill pen is really nice to work with, because you can change the and flex that. So yeah. Have I seen, just saw the creature box thing. Have you seen Sketchbook drawings from Creature Box? Yeah, I kickstarted the first Creature Box. Love those guys' work. I just stopped kickstarting so many art books because, I have nowhere to put them now. So it's always like see some cool designs from people and just like watch from afar, maybe follow them on Instagram or something and just collect their art that way, where I'm not actually physically getting books, because that's all art books back there and running out of space. So, but yeah, they're a great pair. Very dynamic, stylized work. That's what's nice about stylized work as well. Is like those guys, well, you can see the different style between them, and then that's just one style. There's many different styles, right? Seemingly kind of infinite amounts of style, where people are just simplifying things in different way, picking up rhythms in different ways, and producing, interesting work. So thinking about kind of drawing some hair in here now, right? You'll see that with sideburns, right? The sideburn won't crawl all the way to the eyeball as well, right? There'll be some room in between. And you'll see it kind of like the little channel in between your eye and your hairline and your eyebrow will create this. It'll follow it a little bit in here, and then it'll kind of move back from there and then kind of move up that way. So you can kind of start creating interesting shapes that way. Everybody's hairline's different. Some people have really low hairlines. Some people have higher hairlines as well. So yeah, that's something. Did your mom kill you? No, I would never do I'm assuming you're talking about the indie ink messy stuff. I never did that when I was super young. I only did that when I was into art school. And I knew enough not to bring that stuff home because I would ruin. I'd have studio clothes, and that was always just trashed with oil paint and fixatives and all sorts of clothing destroying goods. But yeah, no. Most I had at home when I was a kid was probably like, what would I even have? Crayons, pencil crayons, markers. I didn't love markers when I was a kid. I don't know. Something about their immediacy wasn't vibing on yet. Yeah. For the window thing. Oh, no, like on the back of a car? No. It was always just a dusty vehicle that needed to be washed. So it would just be an indicator like, wash this thing. I'd always try and make nice art of some sort. Not that I remember what that was, but yeah. So something to think about as well when we're dealing with eyeballs, just kind of starting to sketch that in here. The cornea is sort of this protrusion off of the eyeball, right? And if I were to look at your eye from the side, your iris is going to look flat. It's actually going to kind of move inward by a little bit if we could see through the eyeball, so that it kind of takes in light and projects it into the back of the eye on the retina, right? So if that's the case, when you're drawing eyes, if somebody's starting to look away from you, that ellipse is going to start to collapse, right? And you're going to get the pupil at the opening, the pupil kind of being another kind of collapsed ellipse closer to the bottom, because if we were to pull that iris out, it's going to look more like a shape like this, right? So I'm exaggerating it there, but that's what we would get. And then you'd have the cornea on top of that. So structures, right? We're starting to think about structures of the body and how the ocular nerve, the back, will kind of attach to the eye there. So if I were doing a piece where like somebody's eye is flying out like a zombie or something like that, I would actually be thinking about that volume. The worst thing you can do is sort of like the cartoon, or, well, it's not the worst thing you can do, but where people are kind of just mapping flatly this eye on top of, almost like it's painted on rather than it's an actual structure, right? So think about it that way when we're drawing it. So if we were looking at this female character from the side, we'd probably barely see a sliver of the iris in there. So yeah, so like the lips, the nose, everything has a volume, right? It shouldn't be a symbol that you're thinking of unless you're doing two-dimensional stylized work where you can go and simplify that stuff down. And even then, you'd maybe want to kind of think about using similar volumes, like in the eye. Yeah. Actually made the head proportions interesting and fun. Yeah, that's sort of the idea behind this stream, is trying to think about, okay, well, how do you build it? But then what are its applications, right? We do see a lot, as I mentioned before, with all of the idealized forms. It's like that stuff can be beaten to death, and you can definitely remember that very quickly. But then how do you use that to move off into other solutions, right? Like if we were to take her face, kind of playing with that more, and we want to maybe make her like an older lady with sunken eyes and sort of wrinkles everywhere. Right, she might have this kind of really, really hooked, massive nose in there. Sort of thinking about almost like, I mean, any witch you've seen in films or whatever. You could have, you know, her lips might have kind of more of an underbite. She might have a chin that juts way out. Right. I think there's an awesome example of Baba Yaga in the most recent Hellboy. I think it was the most recent. That was an amazing design of kind of like an evil witch demon character. Super creepy. Maybe she has very kind of furry eyebrows in there. Sort of like that easy to kind of create something that just feels so much different, right? You know, she might even have these ears like that. Start kind of adding value and that kind of thing. Damage, so maybe she's taking a lot of damage. There's no reason something like this couldn't be like a heroic character, but it's going to be, there's a certain amount of kind of idealized forms being something that people are more drawn to or they resonate with, and idea or forms that aren't ideal that can repel people even, right? There's a whole bunch of politics behind all of that stuff. So as a concept artist, you got to navigate that for sure, especially in the climate right now where people are very easily offended, right? So I mean, is it something you really want to deal with as an artist where you're just making art that's about something that's not real? Not really, but it's still something you do have to deal with, right? So just gotta, like I said, navigate that as almost like a minefield of things that you should maybe be considering. And even then, you know, like I said, in the modern climate, you might not think about certain things. So gotta be careful out there, right? There we go. Maybe she even has like fangs. I don't know. She's a vampire. Kind of overlaid on top. Anyway, I have a shot at that. See what you can do. When you feel pretty good about that stuff, you can always get into a situation where you start practicing just positioning that sphere now in different ways, kind of thinking about that crosshair as an axis direction, dropping the face down below that in a way that makes sense, bringing that side line up into the ear, right? Maybe I kind of chop a little bit off that head. Starting to visualize that mass now. I know where my eyebrows are. I know approximately where my eyes are going to be, where that nose is going to be. And then I can kind of start bringing that stuff in. So the sketching process is me right now kind of remembering all of the sort of all of the things that we've just talked about with this, and just starting with that sphere and thinking about dropping that front of the face straight down, thinking about where the lips and the chin and the nose kind of hang out from there based on those other marks, right? Sketching that in there. You know, if I didn't make any mistakes, I can tweak them fairly simply. can make that ear a little bit further back, like so. You know, you can start kind of getting hair coming out off of the character, like so. Right. However you think that's going to come off of the character. She might have side of her head shaved. Right. I can always drop that down, get in there and get some of that detail in. Something like that. You can start to see where that stuff will kind of come through in there. Did you ever get inspired by cartoons like Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes? Yeah, I mean, probably inspired by everything, right? That I've seen, but I've definitely seen those. Itchy and Scratchy is a nice riff on them. What else? I really like the backdrop, some of the stylization in those cartoons. They're pretty kind of graphic and fun. Great ways of kind of thinking about representing spaces. Get that cranium coming out the back there. See, like her eyes in here may be a hint too close. I'll take another stab at those, at least for me. Give it kind of typical scar. Maybe she's like some sort of space pirate type. Maybe she's got a broken nose. Could look tough. Move that hairline back a little bit. Something like that. Who knows? Whatever we want, right? So. Yeah. But Animaniacs, yeah, I loved that show. It was a nice kind of update at the time of those kind of old school cartoons. So yeah, it definitely was fun to watch that. You know, stylization like the original Batman cartoon, Batman the Animated Series. That was one of my favorites all time. Very, very interesting aesthetic art direction in that. Felt very original at the time. I think it still does, right? I think it's one of the more the favorite, one of the favorite superhero cartoons classic Spider-Man. Even I love the watercolor in the background when I was swinging through. It's always like some dark, stormy kind of vibe in there. But yeah, that was all pretty cool. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, like those are the things that we can play with. I mean, just whenever you're looking at targeting something, you can start to use that form, right? And just moving in a certain direction. If somebody's looking downward, for instance, I'm just basically setting up where those eyeballs are going to be, where the brow is going to be on that head, right? That brow kind of encompasses those eyeballs underneath, and then I can kind of triangulate from there to figure out where some of those shapes will occur. So give that a shot. Create a child character. I mean, the child character is going to be that shape, but with a really kind of smaller nose, smaller mouth, right? Really, really small jaw, for instance. Still get the separation in the eyes in there. I get the kind of chubby cheeks, but the cranium is usually fairly big on a kid, right? Starts to look like the baby from Roger Rabbit. But very cherubic. All right, so you see that face is just kind of really pressed in at that point. Those kind of chubby cheeks. And then that kind of wispy baby hair. So over time, you will see sort of like the face really grow out of that cranium, right? I think I read somewhere that the top of our cranium doesn't change too much over time. It's a lot of the other features in our face we grow into. There you go. Sort of real quick stab at the baby face with some rosy cheeks. And he's also a space pirate with a scar. Just kidding. Well, why not, right? But there you go. Sort of like expanding some of those things out a little bit more, compressing some of those shapes a little bit to, really exaggerate some of the layout of those shapes in the face. So, but yeah, that can be a way to do it. So I'd play with it, take a stab at it. Yeah, the cigar in the mouth. And see how that goes for you. But I just wanted to kind of represent a little bit of some of the measurements on the head, the way you guys can break that stuff up. So like I said, give that a shot and see if it works better in your artwork. That's going to be it from me for the stream until Thursday. So hopefully you all had some fun, at least had some practice time in there. But it's all about the practice. So that's our Mondays for us. In the stream this week, we're going to continue on with the stylized environment. And so tune in for that. Otherwise, have a great week. And we will see you all later.